So a couple of weeks ago, I was in Chicago with some friends. One of them had a conference to go to, and invited the rest of us to go with her, to turn it into a girls' trip for the weekend. We were there from Friday morning to Monday night, and we had a blast. On Monday, we were doing some last-minute sightseeing and exploring. It was kind of eerie the entire day. Since it was Monday and cold, there were hardly any other people in the high tourist areas. We kept making comments on how it felt almost post-apocalyptic. Anyways, fast forward to later that day. We had just finished visiting a nature center. They had a wonderful butterfly room, and decided to visit the Lincoln Park Zoo. It was free and right across the way, and also practically empty. We got to see some cool animals, and decide to go through the African exhibit, since it was cold and we wanted to be indoors. We excitedly went through the exhibit and had a blast. And when we discovered that we were a corner's turn away from the giraffes, we made a beeline for them. We reached the exhibit, and there was a man to the side of it with a woman in a wheelchair, both facing and watching the giraffes. The giraffes were gorgeous. I excitedly looked around and turned to discover, to my horror, that the lady in the wheelchair was not a lady. She was a mannequin. I decided to get the hell out of there and quickly went to the edge of the exhibit, behind Wheelchair Man, and waited for my friends to notice the mannequin and join me. I turned around just in time to see friend 1 notice it, and to see her face drop from excitement to horror. Our other friend was too busy watching the giraffes to even look over at us, seeing as how when the man said something, she responded. She had a 2-minute conversation with him, where he kept talking about how giraffes are superior to humans. That humans spent too much time trying to get to the moon, instead of stopping and wondering whether they should. And how you won't see a giraffe smoking. My one friend and I kept looking at each other uneasily. We wanted to get out of there. While the conversation was still going on, I took the opportunity to get a second look at the mannequin. She was all bundled up for the cold. She was holding some sort of toy, and the tips of her fingers were damaged. My first instinct was to say chewed off. I go back behind the mannequin, and our friend who hasn't noticed it yet runs up to the exhibit after someone says there's another animal down there. The man says it's an aardvark. She turns around excitedly to look at him, and then she finally notices the mannequin. She quickly grabs the final friend, who still hasn't noticed any of this, because she was too busy watching the giraffes, and we get the hell out of there. After getting back home, I did a Google search. I Googled man wheelchair mannequin Chicago and found him easily. I found pictures, a story about someone that saw him at a restaurant, and a video on YouTube. He apparently married her on Jerry Springer a few years back, and her name is Jackie. She's a sex doll. So this is the story of how I met a celebrity in Chicago. Or 2 celebrities, I suppose. 3 days ago, my St. Bernard started whining to go outside around 3 a.m. or so. My girlfriend sleeps through it, so I'm always the one to get up and take care of the dogs. We have 4. I live on 5 acres of land in the Pacific Northwest region of the U.S. For perspective, my house is in the front of my property, and all the acreage is in the back. We have a normal-sized backyard, and then a barbed wire fence that separates the backyard from a large field. The reason for the barbed wire is so that coyotes and other predators cannot get into the yard and harm the dogs. I have neighbors, but they're spread out pretty far from us. Back to my dog waking up. She usually sleeps through the night with no problems, so this was a little strange. And she did the same thing the next night as well. This is when I started to pay attention. The third night, I decided to go out with her on the leash. I wanted to make sure that she was only using this time outside to go to the bathroom, instead of an excuse to go play in the yard. As soon as I opened the door, she was pulling on the leash towards the field. When we got about 20 feet from the fence, she stopped and was just staring straight ahead. I then looked out into the field to see what she was staring at, but I couldn't see anything. After a few minutes, she started to growl, which she never does. I looked again, and what I saw was unnerving. I looked at the perimeter of the field and saw what looked like a tall man, dressed in an old-fashioned jacket and top hat. I was shocked enough to see someone on my property at that time of night, but what really creeped me out was how he was moving. There was something off about it. First of all, he was walking towards me, but his steps were weird, like a bride walking down the aisle at a wedding. Step, pause, step, pause. After about 10 steps, he made a right turn and continued, following the fence. He then made another right turn and was walking away from the fence. He seemed to be walking in a big square pattern. My first thought was that it was someone on drugs or drunk, but his movements were very deliberate and coordinated, not at all like someone under the influence. I didn't feel that this person was a threat, so I took my dog inside. I didn't want her barking up a storm and waking my girlfriend. I then went back outside to talk to him. Of course, there was no one there. So the next day, I went to all of my neighbors and asked them about it. They all thought it was creepy, but had no explanation. I think many of them thought I was the one under the influence. So that night, my dog started whining at 1:47 a.m. So out we went. Sure enough, he was there again. Top hat and all. Step, pause, step, pause. I was really hoping that I'd be able to update everyone and say that this man that's been coming into my yard hadn't returned, and life was back to normal. But I am not. I haven't slept very well, and just feel sick most of the time. The strange thing is that my dog is no longer waking up in the middle of the night. The last 2 nights I've woken up on my own. That, to me, is even more frightening. Since my first post, the man has returned every night. I tried to get video and pictures of him, but it's so dark that none of them came out, except for this one. After I took this photo, I turned and ran home, because I was forced to use the flash, and I'm sure that he must have seen it. Although, in every other interaction, he seems to be oblivious to the surroundings. What's really messing with my head now, though, is what he was doing before I took the photo. He was walking in the same square pattern with the pauses like before, only this time, after a few steps, he would kneel down and make a sort of forced coughing noise. It sounded like an animal, almost like a wheezing. At first I thought he was choking or having a hard time breathing, but after the cough, he stood up straight and continued the pattern. Step, pause, step, pause. I finally called the police after telling my girlfriend about this whole thing. I told them about the man coming onto my property in the middle of the night. They couldn't have cared less. I asked if they could come out and escort this person off of my property, and she told me that they didn't have the resources for that. I couldn't believe it. I must have yelled, "He's trespassing on my property, and that's against the law, correct?" about 10 times. She eventually hung up on me, after saying to call back if he makes a threat or damages my property in any way. I was pissed, but even more, I felt alone. The police are there to protect and serve, and I felt like they just didn't care. so I figured I'd have to do it myself. My friends came over around midnight, and we were playing video games. They were intrigued with the whole thing, and I suspect that they were also skeptical. But they made me feel better, so I was happy for that. I decided to check the field every hour to see if the man was out there. I went out to check around 2:30 a.m. and saw that he was there, doing his familiar stutter step. I ran back inside and told my 2 football buddies. We had decided to not use force, if at all possible, but we would if we had to. We went into the field, and I could tell that the man noticed us. The strange thing is that this didn't deter him from walking. He looked at us, then would look forward and continue. My 2 friends were silent at first. They admitted to me later that they were really creeped out by his cadence. We got within about 15 or 20 feet of the man. I yelled out, "Hello, sir, can I help you with something?" He didn't respond at all, so I continued, "Sir, you're on private property and you're trespassing." There wasn't so much as a waver in his steps. I started to get upset. "Sir, you need to leave my property immediately, or I will call the police and you'll be arrested." I knew this wasn't true, but I was trying to scare him. He continued with his walk, like he was on a mission or something. This went on for a little bit, so we walked closer and basically started to escort him to the road. I was behind him with my hand on his back, and my friends flanked him on each side, sort of guiding him along. He didn't struggle, or even seem to care that we were altering his route. He did, however, continue the cadence. Step, pause, step, pause. Slowly we made our way to the road, and I was amazed at how easy it seemed to be going. But then I started thinking, what about tomorrow or the next day? What if he keeps coming back? I knew I didn't want that to happen, so as we guided him to walk down the road, I said, "Don't come back to my property ever again." I spoke with the police, and they assured me that I can use whatever force I deem necessary on my own property if I feel threatened. I will never forget what happened next. With the coordination and elegance of Fred Astaire, the man in one swift move did a hop skip, turned around and tipped his cap, and said, "Much obliged." And then he turned back around and continued down the road. Step, pause, step, pause. We were all stunned. We watched him walk away until we couldn't see him anymore. I felt such a huge feeling of relief. I was just glad he was leaving, hopefully for the last time. I can't help but wonder what this whole thing was about. Why my property? Why in the middle of the night? Why the strange way of walking? I'm guessing some sort of mental illness, but I'll probably never know. And I'm going to start saving for a better fence. A little background before I begin. I'm a female from remote Western Australia. I am surrounded by thousands of kilometers of farmland and bushland, and we have a large variety of native wildlife on our farm and in the surrounding area. Every day after work, I walk my 2 border collies through a selected track, which is roughly 10 kilometers long, as a way to unwind from my shitty job. I've seen creepy things in there before, such as dead livestock, which have been dumped by farmers and thrown across logs in a creepy fashion, but nothing compares to what I witnessed this particular day. It is important to note that since we are so rural, there is a lack of people out here. However, I sometimes pass a camper or the odd drug grower using the remoteness of the bush to grow their marijuana, despite the area being well known to police for drug growth. So as I was walking my dogs late, last year in the middle of summer, I was surprised when my dogs stopped. began to growl, and the hair on the back of their neck began to stand. I thought that it may just be a kangaroo or feral pig, as my younger dog gets quite worked up when they're around. This thought quickly faded when I suddenly felt cold and broke out in goosebumps, despite it being a hot 37 degrees Celsius at 5:30 p.m. A couple of seconds after feeling this, I rounded the corner, and there was a little girl standing in the middle of the trail. The sudden sight of someone frightened the shit out of me. The little girl was looking in the opposite direction, with her back to me, and looked around 7 years old by her height. She had dirty blonde, medium-length hair, a plain red shirt and black shorts. As I was about to laugh to myself for letting a little girl scare me, she turned and looked at me. This was no normal girl. Her eyes were black. The thing opened its mouth and let out an ear-splitting screech, turned and ran back into the bush. Needless to say, I hightailed it out of there and ran for about 6 kilometers, fueled by fear, before my adrenaline crashed and my legs burnt. After another 2 kilometers, I arrived home, ran inside and locked my dogs and myself in the bedroom. I didn't walk through that bush for a month afterwards. I have been walking this area since I was 10 years old, and have never experienced anything like this before. And I am posting this here in hopes of finding out what the hell I saw. An Australian skinwalker? Native Aboriginal spirit disguised as a little girl? Or just some really fucked up prank played by some campers? This took place February 3rd of this year, which happened to be my 21st birthday. My boyfriend and I wanted to do something more low-key, because he's not 21 yet, and we had hectic weeks with class and work. After drinking a little in our apartment, we decided to pack a flask and walk to the little movie theater down the street. Now this theater was built in 1914. It's kind of run down, and only has 4 screens. They're BYOB, and it's walking distance, so everyone gets wasted while watching movies. It's great. So we walk over, find seats, and wait for the movie to start. We were seeing that scary movie called Split, and I was so excited. Anyone who has ever had large amounts of alcohol knows that it makes you have to pee so bad. Before the movie started, I ran down the hallway to the bathroom, while my boyfriend saved our seats. Here's where it gets creepy. I walk in the bathroom, a little drunk, and very excited for the movie. The door opens up to a very small room, with 1 sink and 2 stalls. Because the theater is so old, the doors to the stalls barely stay latched. When I get into the bathroom, I see there's a normal-looking woman, probably in her late 30s. She's standing at the sink, looking in the mirror. I don't even give it a second thought. I have a little bit of social anxiety, so I kind of stood back and waited for her to finish up and leave. I hate peeing in a quiet bathroom with other people in there. I'm standing behind her and waiting for her to move out of the way so I can move past her into the bathroom stall. This woman stops, makes eye contact with me, and doesn't turn the water on. She just stares directly at me through the mirror. I give her a look, but don't really do anything. All of a sudden, her hand reaches out to get soap. I'm in the way, so I apologize and take a step back. Instead of getting the soap like I thought, this woman, still staring at me, strokes my hair. I'm wearing it down, so she just reaches over and kind of pats me. Again, I just glare at her. Like I said, I'm drunk. She's taking a long-ass time to finally wash her hands, and I really have to pee. so I bite the bullet and go into the bathroom stall. I hear her finishing up and the door close, so I start peeing. Then I hear a noise. I look under the door, and the woman is standing right in front of it, so close that her nose must be touching it. I only see her feet, but if I were to open the door, we would be standing face to face. It turns out she opened and closed the bathroom door to make me think she left, but was really standing right outside the stall listening to me pee. I've honestly never been so weirded out. Throughout this entire exchange, she never said a word. As I flushed, she stepped away and left. I was expecting her to be standing outside the bathroom after I washed my hands, but she wasn't. And I didn't see her again that night. This story that I would like to share was passed down to me from my late granddad. The circumstances are so unusual, so unlike anything I've ever heard, that it's been in the back of my mind for nearly 20 years. My granddad was a great talker and storyteller in his own way, and my family agrees that he wouldn't mind if I shared it with others. The look on my granddad's face every time he told this story, well, you could tell that it shook him up. First, I'll need to give a little background. My granddad was born in the early 20s in a dirt floor, 2-room farmhouse in rural South Carolina, an only child of sharecroppers during the Great Depression. He was a premature baby, and his parents, already having lost one infant, were understandably protective of him. I'm sure they were relieved and very happy that he was a strong and healthy child, albeit with an incredible amount of wanderlust. Restless and energetic, he almost always finished his chores as quickly as he could, so that he could take up his little fishing rod and roam to his heart's content. Back then, even horse-drawn carts were a rarity on these long-gone dirt roads. Cars were practically unheard of in that part of the country in those days. Disliking horses, but still greatly desiring to put as much distance between home and himself as he could in the span of an afternoon, my granddad had little choice other than to walk. And walk he did. He combed through miles of forest, fields and swampland, barefoot as the day he came into this world. Heedless of brambles or snakes, they wouldn't bother him if he didn't bother them. As much as he enjoyed it, it was a lonely business. His father was a hale man, but with acres of land to help tend, as well as livestock, he hardly had the time to join his son on his walks. Sometimes one of the local boys would go with him, but that wasn't often. So, being practically kin to everyone within a 30-mile radius, my granddad took up the southern tradition of goin' visitin'. One of his favorite places to go was to Uncle Peter's. Uncle Peter lived on one of the branches of the lake. It was a tiny shack, hardly more than a shanty, and barely big enough to fit both him and his spinster sister, Henrietta, but they made do. Now, Uncle Peter loved to talk about as much as he loved to fish. So when he would spot my granddad coming up the dirt track towards the house, he'd put whatever he was working on aside. Aunt Henrietta was prone to give him the stink eye for this, but she was fond of my granddad too, so she never said anything. It became a tradition of sorts for my grandfather to put a spare shirt in a sack, along with a treat of some kind that his mother made, and head off for Uncle Peter's every other weekend. He did this for years. Usually it was about dark when he'd set off. The distance between his house and Uncle Peter's was about 6 or 7 miles. Granddad would usually stay through Sunday, heading home after evening supper. Suffice to say, there wasn't much to be afraid of back then, other than the local wildlife. And as I said before, As long as you minded your own business, they minded theirs. He'd been walking through the countryside at night all his life. He was comfortable and felt very safe. He kissed his aunt and shook his uncle's hand, and then started home at a brisk pace. It was autumn, so the air was pleasantly cool, a welcome relief from summer's oppressively humid heat. He said that there was a full moon that night, and when he would walk out in the open, he could easily see where he was going. The dirt track that led away from Uncle Peter's shack meandered through a bit of marshland before it ended at the wider road. Usually he didn't take that route, since cutting through the fields and woodlands was a straighter shot back to his parents' farmhouse, and the road slithered and slunk its way around the far side of the lake before curving back in the direction of home. That night, however, with the moonlight and the refreshing nip in the wind, Granddad felt the urge to do a bit of meandering. Turning at the end of the path, he stepped onto the road, barefoot as a jaybird, and softly whistling to himself. The route was so familiar that he hardly paid any attention to the surroundings, letting his feet do most of the work, while he occupied himself with other thoughts. Before he knew it, he was approaching the lake. The water was calm that night, dark and still. He slowed down a little. It was such a pretty sight that he nearly missed what was standing not far up the road. At first it was just a silhouette, a tall and solid-looking shadow that seemed to be facing the water. Granddad thought it might have been a trick of the light initially. He walked through a cemetery once in the middle of the night and thought he'd seen a soldier riding a white horse, until he got closer and realized it was just a large dew-dropped spiderweb. As he drew closer, he quickly realized it wasn't his eyes. There was something standing on the side of the road. In fact, it was a man. He could tell by the build, broad-shouldered and narrow at the hip. And he could tell by the clothes. Even in the moonlight, it was evident that the man wore a dark suit that did not fit him well. A shapeless hat was on his head, causing his form to appear elongated and odd-looking. From the distance of several feet, Granddad could see the shine of good shoes. The man was standing close to the water. The shifting reflection of the lake softly illuminated his face, and Granddad could make out strong features that had been weathered with time and toil. The lines around his mouth and eyes were distinctive as he smiled. That was when he realized that the man was smiling at him. In fact, the man had been staring at him just as long, or longer, as Granddad had been doing the same. Quickly remembering his manners, he greeted the man politely. The man's expression didn't change as his head turned to follow my granddaddy's movement until he stopped on the other side of the road. A little unnerved, my grandfather stood awkwardly for a long moment, waiting for what he thought would be the appropriate amount of time for a reply. The man didn't speak. His face never changed, but he slowly brought his hand up and made a beckoning motion with his fingers, silently asking my granddad to come closer. My grandfather shook his head. "No, sir, I can't stay and talk. I have to get home. You have a nice night." Nodding his head, my granddad started walking again, passing the strange man with a slightly quicker pace than he'd been walking before. Feeling that he was being watched, he stopped again, a little further up the road. He turned to look back, to see the man had turned around, so that he was facing the direction my granddad was going. But now he was waist deep in the water. Confused and shocked, my grandfather could only gape at the man as he stood in the lake, that same grin on his face as he lifted his hand and beckoned again. Shaking his head quickly, my granddad repeated what he'd said before. "No, sir. I can't stay and talk. I have to get home. You have a nice night." He whipped around and started walking even faster up the road, listening for the sound of splashing or footsteps behind him. But there was nothing, and that was when it struck him. He'd never heard a sound. No splash, no drip, no scuffle of shoes in the dirt. Silence. Closing in on the trees, he felt a shiver run down his back, as the feeling of being watched washed over him again. He froze on the spot. Everything in him was telling him to just keep walking, and not to stop until he was through his mother's kitchen door. But there was an even stronger urge to turn around, to look back one more time. The compulsion was too much to resist. He turned again to look at the lake. The man was still there. Only now he was further in. The water was up to his shoulders, and he was still smiling. There was movement, and then he saw the man lift his hand a third time, motioning for him to come back, to come closer, to come into the water. Granddad wasn't sure which, or even if it was any of those things, and he never found out. Without a word, he turned and walked away. He walked the 7 miles home, unnerved and perplexed, and for the next 80 years, until his death at the age of 91, he never figured out who the man was, why he was there, or what he wanted. Over and over again, he told us that story. The encounter clearly haunted him, and it haunts me. I shudder to think what would have happened had my granddad actually gotten close to the man. But the one thing that has stuck out in my mind about his experience, more than anything, is that the man stood almost neck deep in water and didn't even make a ripple. Hey guys and ladies, thanks for watching. If you want me to tell your story or read a creepypasta, email me at the address in the description. So I pretty much save skits for themed videos and the True Scary Stories volumes. So I was thinking maybe sometimes I'll do like a story I remember from being a kid or whatever. So let's give it a shot. Cue the fucking music.
Storytime.
One time when I was 15 or 16 or something, I had went with my dad over to some guy's house. We were going to do some work or something. I don't remember. But they were talking about whatever, and I see that he has like all these Playboys, like, neatly fucking organized, sideways stacked like in shelves. And they're talking, so I'm looking kind of through them. I find one I really like. And so then I run out to the truck real quick. Well, it was like a Dodge Ram or something. It wasn't like a flatbed. Or it didn't have an open bed. It was like a SUV. I think it was a Dodge Ram. But anyway, I put it under the back seat. And I went back in and we did whatever. And then before we leave, I don't remember exactly why, but, maybe my dad bought something from him or we were going to take something he didn't want. It was like a table or something. So we're walking out to the truck and I'm thinking, oh, fuck. He's going to put the seat forward. He's going to lift it up. It like went forward and went into the back of the two front seats. So he does it and that Playboy's sitting there. And he's like, oh, what's this? And like he doesn't care about shit like that. I mean, he probably cares I took it from the guy. So anyway, we had to go back in. And I had to give it back to him and apologize. And he was all fucking pissed off. It was like part of his collection. So I guess the moral of this story is, don't steal. And if you are going to steal, don't hide it where it's going to be seen 5 minutes later. Be good to animals, even people. See ya.
Ja, snälla, Bergsbes, Rish.
You thought I was saying Ripley and I was saying Ripple. You silly ass.